Hello, I'm Chris Flisher, and welcome to Turning of the Wheel, an intelligent, lively discussion on astrology, art, and adventure. Timing is everything, and as the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed. Join me as I explore the current planetary alignments and offer insights for coping with change. Educational, informative, enlightening, the Turning of the Wheel is a welcome pause in your daily swirl of constant change. Through intelligent discourse, inspired guests, and educational segments, I will help to enlighten your knowledge of astrology and guide you to accept change as the great wheel of life turns. Call in with your questions and speak with some of the greatest visionaries in the time-tested practice of astrology. Turning of the Wheel, Astrology, Art, and Adventure with Chris Flisher, each week on Turning of the Wheel podcast. Hello and welcome to Turning of the Wheel. My name is Chris Flisher. As you know, this is a show about astrology, art, and spiritual adventure. And it's always fun to go on this adventure and see what's going on with the world. And I'd like to touch base with old friends who I haven't spoken with in a long time about these topics that we are currently in the midst of. Before we get started, though, I want to remind you about my newsletter, which goes out every Sunday afternoon at 1:30. You can subscribe to it from my website, chrisflisher.com or turningofthewheel.com. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter, I'm on YouTube, all those places that you expect to see people like me. I'm there. And so I encourage you to sign up for the newsletter and follow me that way, and you get a lot of good information each week, which comes to your mailbox every Sunday afternoon, as I mentioned. And it usually gives you a good preview of what's going on in the mundane world of astrology, as well as what's happening in the individual signs for the week to come. So without further ado, years ago I ran into Sharita Star, one of my old friends, and we did a lot of radio shows together, and we haven't touched base in a long time. She's been sort of doing her thing, I've been doing my thing, but I'm great to have her back on the air today with me today to talk about the coming changes we're about to step into as the month of May unfolds. So welcome back. It's great to talk to you again, Sharita.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for having me back. It's always fun to talk astrology shop with you, Chris.
Yeah, no kidding. And we have a lot to talk about. We've got, obviously the biggest thing we have on the horizon is Uranus going into Taurus, which has not been in that position for 84 years. So that is a major event, and we're already seeing the rumblings of that, aren't we, with the volcanoes and stuff like that?
Mm-hmm. Well, Uranus rules things like earthquakes and unexpected disturbances, let's put it that way.
Yeah. I mean, last time it stepped into Aries, it went in, that's when we had the Fukushima disaster.
Fukushima happened,
and the tsunami in Japan. So we're
on the tipping point of a sign. It's going to cause a little disruption. I've had so many people reach out to me and go, hey, I thought this Mercury in the shadow was all over with, and how come my technology still isn't working right?
Right,
and
no
Uranus
kidding.
does rule that as well. So we are seeing, if you've got glitches in your technology, Uranus is going to say, hey, shake it up. Maybe you need to reinvent what you've got. And,
right, exactly.
So that's going on, too. That is part of that energetic pulse of it being at the very edge of Aries right now. And yes, it's odd. We get that lovely Taurus new moon finally moving off the 20. I don't know if I'm sure you have noticed the last 6 months of new moons have all been on that 26-degree point. They sort of just staggered, except for the eclipse that happened in February. But now we are moving again, and now we're going to have a 24-degree Taurus new moon on Tuesday. And then a couple hours later is the Uranus's big entrance into Taurus.
Right. And it's interesting, when we see these things, I mean, what they really spell out more than anything else is sort of a historical precedent, because we look back in time to when this happened before, and it's kind of disturbing. In many ways, it's disturbing. It's disturbing on one level. It's disturbing on one level. Very disturbing on one level, but also it's spot on with regard to the cyclical nature of astrology, which I absolutely love. I love when we get that validation and we see things just click into space. And now, that doesn't say it's going to be a happy time coming up. We have some serious stuff going on in the world.
Oh, boy. The summer alone will knock most people's socks right off.
Yeah, I believe so.
Not on very well.
That's a good way of putting it, yeah.
Like, who's wearing socks in the summer anyway? But
that's true. So I guess they're going to be off no matter what.
Oh, I think they're going to be off.
Right.
If you're not meditating on a beach, you're probably not going to be that happy this summer.
I think that's true. There's a lot of stuff, and it's going to impact all of us in some level, because everything has a ripple effect, regardless of where our role in this greater picture is. We're all going to be impacted in some way, just because of the collective nature.
Well, sure, and aside from the collective nature, which I think and I'm sure you would agree, there's going to be a load of tension going on this summer. We've got a lot of inner planet retrograde activity, and then we've got 3 other outer planets that will also be retrograde. The outer ones don't obviously create such flux on the Earth like the inner ones do. We'll have an overlapping Mercury and during the Mars retrograde,
Right.
an intense lunar eclipse that will conjunct the Mars retrograde. The I think it conjuncts the South Node as well, and it's going to be a very interesting time. That's right on the 27th of July.
Yeah.
So everything's going to be asking us for reflection, which overall for 2018 as a universal 2-year, when you tie the numerology into the conversation, this is a very emotionally realigning year, finding balance, uniting the divide in life. And so overall, it's interesting. And even when you look into the fall of this year, we've got more interplanet retrogrades happening. And it is a year of, not to say that you can't put your foot on the gas, but you're putting your foot on the gas a lot less this year than normal.
Well, everybody's in sort of a pause mode. Everybody's in a sort of a wait and see mode, I think, because there's so much in the air that's left undefined yet at this point. So
absolutely, absolutely, and it of course, in light of your point of looking back 84 years ago, what was happening, in history, and we are at that very same there's a disturbance in the force, let's put it that way.
Well, what I think is the most remarkable thing is the fact that when we look back to, say, 1935, this is, the Depression is typically attributed to 1929, but the results of the Depression really didn't happen until the following years.
They fell out afterwards,
right.
Yes.
And so Herbert Hoover was president of the United States. He was an isolationist, anti-immigration president. Well, doesn't that sound familiar?
Doesn't that sound familiar? Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure who that fits.
But, that alone in itself, and then, of course, that led the stage, that set the ground for what was to happen with World War II, which broke out in 1939. So, I don't want to go down the road saying that this is going to happen, but the cards and players are in place for such an event very similar to occur of some sort.
Yes, something intense is about to go down. It would be fair to say.
Yeah.
And it's always interesting, because I very much keep looking to the summer and that lunar eclipse, especially, that happens, conjuncting the Mars retrograde, and it will be squaring Uranus as well.
Yeah,
so that's a lot of tension going on, a lot of unexpected irritability, just people not coming together. They're going to try to, obviously, in astrology, squares are not negative, but most people resist what they're trying to do, which is create a different foundation.
I think
most people don't want to reflect either.
No, they don't.
I think what it really, so that's another problem.
It is. I think what it really points to more than anything else is not so much difficult. It points to a challenge, and the challenge is there. Yes. But with Mars and Uranus together, they're both. What a combination. Mars is this the firebrand. There's this action-oriented planet that can spark anything, and then you got Uranus, which just lights the fuse, and boom, away you go.
Yeah, and we don't know how it's going to turn out. Uranus, I always say, you can have the best psychic on the planet telling you how it's going to turn out, but Uranus is like, I'm not going to tell you how it's going to turn out. You're just going to have to wait to see how it crumbles.
Mm-hmm. We might get an idea of the theme or the area or the neighborhood in which it might occur, but that we're not going to get the specificity that we want.
Exactly. And, of course, Uranus also entering Taurus, the sign of stability, finances, things that are already established. What we already, believe we know about any of these, topics, it is about to shift, break through into something different. Mm-hmm. So people do need to be very prepared for that. And I think, as the year goes on, especially, again, looking towards the fall, we're going to have a Venus retrograde, which, of course, we know always corrects everything financially as well. Or wants us to sit in that reflective mode again and reevaluate, what the value of everything is. So, as we close out the year, it's still, quite intense for us to really allow ourselves to take a step back and not be push. It's not a push forward kind of year,
Well, it's a wait and see, like as I mentioned before.
And it's a wait and see.
And then I think the thing to do is to try to prepare yourself, shore up your defenses in some way, because I think that the stock market's going to be entering a very volatile period right now.
Oh, you bet.
And this is just the sort of thing that will rile some people and of course all the other things that are going to be unfolding over the course of this year. But I'm interested, what does this say to you numerologically for the United States? Are we in what I consider to be I can see what it is astrologically. I'm assuming that it's fairly close numerologically as well.
Well, we're finishing up right now as a nation. We're in a 3 personal year cycle. Mm-hmm. So we're building upon, we're kind of as a nation trying to build a new foundation that would be back in from 2000 and I'm just doing my math quick in my head. I think it's 2015. Mm-hmm. And of course, 16 was our very emotional year, and not that it's still not emotional here, but
we really, sort of got a dose of reality.
2016 really riled up the emotions for everyone on whatever level they wanted to take them to. And this is the year when you're in a 3 personal year, whether you're a person or the country, the business, whatever it is you want to look at. The 3 years about the willingness to become a student and be educated. Mm-hmm. So, and broaden and feel like you're growing on some level. And I think in some regards, obviously, I think the U.S. is maybe missing that a little bit.
Well, we certainly have gotten ourselves in a position for whatever reason.
We may be learning our lessons and learning them the hard way.
Well, I think that's how you learn lessons. I think if we became apathetic or we became complacent in our lesson learning, nothing would sink in. So in many ways, as abrasive and as caustic as this feels to us, it really is in some ways necessary, because I think otherwise we would have just sat still.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and as we lead up to July 4th this year, we'll switch into the 4 personal year. So it's going to take what we've laid down in a sense of a new foundation, building a new foundation as a country. This year is going to complete that 4th wall. Yeah. From 2018 moving into the first half of 19. But of course, a 4 year is also guided by Uranus. So there's a lot of unexpected things, kind of things shaking down in the country a little bit, or a lot, I should say. A lot,
actually, yes.
I don't want to say, I don't like to cast like, oh my God, go run and hide under a rock. But
no, it doesn't serve any.
And it happens for our country in our area of where we nurture. That's where it is asking for us. Take a good look at your environment. What are you doing, in your home, in your kind of like your family life of understanding who we are as a nation. That's a very that's where it starts anyway.
Right. And our identity is sort of under duress right now, and it's sort of. We're torn, obviously. We have this great disparity in the United States between 2 different types of 2 different parties, if nothing else, and political identities. Mm-hmm. And that whole has to settle down at some point in time. And that does require a bit of work, and it gets worse before it gets better, is what I think.
Yes, I agree. And because, Uranus, of course, will also be one of the planets that by August is going to also join the retrograde party.
Right, exactly. Good, yep.
And then, because we do get that, it's crossed over into the nation's our area of where we create, what do we really put our passion behind, loving to do, to manifest, as a country. But then that retrograde starts, and then it goes, back into that 4th house thing. Right. So that, the latter part of the year is really cast in we've got to pay attention to how we nurture as a nation.
Well, we do.
And reinvent it across the board, because, Uranus is about reinventing, even if it's supposedly not broken, but there is a lot broken, and I think most people can admit that. The country has a lot of things to fix.
It has a lot of things to fix, and I think that, Taurus and being the groundwork for infrastructure in particular was one area where we really need to put some focus. We've been putting it off for a very long time, and that is something that we cannot overlook any longer. So I think that we might see some sort of action there. which is definitely disturbing and startling, to be honest, because who knows what that could look like. But we do have to. See, all of these events, I think, in some ways, drag our attention into focus. We've got to stand and pay attention. We just can't turn or walk away from it. That's the thing.
Yeah.
So that, because it's so harsh and so real, we have to pay attention to it. We have no option. Like I always say, if the roof did not leak, we would not fix it. Well, guess what? The roof is leaking.
The roof is leaking. It sure is. It sure is.
And so we have nothing but to address that in some ways. And, it's going to be a difficult time. There's no question about it. With so much activity on the major stuff, not just the United States, but the United States' role in the United States in the world is changing rapidly, so that we're no longer the top dog, which may be good in some ways. I'm not exactly sure, but I've always thought that we took too much of the spotlight from the rest of the world. Maybe it's time for us to be a little more humble, but we certainly aren't being led by a humble man. So I'm not sure where that goes.
No, not at this point. And it's interesting too that that this now that we're just kind of focusing on the U.S. this summer and I do always find it interesting as well. We are a Mercury retrograde country.
Yeah, we kind of are. Yeah, I can see that.
The July 4th of 1776.
Yeah.
The Mercury was retrograde at the time that they signed, and initiated us as a nation. So it is an interesting. We could just talk about that. Our country is Mercury retrograded.
I know, and
in some degree, but that particular one that's coming this summer is in our house or area for a nation of transformation, allowing ourselves to become reborn. Mm-hmm. That's where that the one that will come July 26th through the 19th of August is all about the U.S. getting into rebirth, and understanding this is. You're not going to avoid this anymore.
No. And the idea of rebirth, it does provide something of value because you get a chance to sort of reinvent things, set new things in place. But that requires a tearing down of old structures. Anytime you tear down old structures, you begin to feel vulnerable because you haven't got the stability or the security or the confidence in knowing where you're going. So it gets to be a double whammy. But then when you come out of it, I've always found that when you go through personal tragedy, at the time that you're in it, it is pure hell. But when you get out of it and put some distance between you and the event, you can see how it probably in some ways serves your greater good to have been through that process, because now you're a deeper, richer, more erudite person as a result.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that that takes a lot of courage to do.
It does.
Which and I also I always say this is we've become, and God bless the technology for what it allows us to do, but there is a very, very intense disconnection that is going on with humanity right now overall.
Right.
People. And I know you're always the one that talks about all the neighborhoods need to share one lawnmower kind of thing. And it's it's such a great concept. It's I wish we could figure that out with other things, because we've gotten so detached as people from what these personal relationships in our life are all meant to be about. And I think I don't want to refer to it as fake news whatsoever, but I think we have a lot of misinformation going on out there as well. Not necessarily fake news, but there's a lot of misinformation due to the use of the technology in the way that you could believe anything if you wanted to these days.
Well, that's true.
It's in print somewhere.
Right. And the idea of the community coming together could be a byproduct of some sort of natural thing that happens to us, whereby I'm not trying to predict disaster, but I'm saying if there were some sort of event where people had to sort of help each other, like a forest fire or something, like we've seen these events in the area, or even that volcano in Hawaii. When we see these types of events happen, they do bring out the greater sort of instinctive quality we all have of being together. And we do have that. And social media, in some ways, I love it. I hate it. People know I have a love-hate relationship with social media because...
Oh, you do too?
Yeah.
It must be our Virgo ascendant.
Yeah, I think that's got to be it because it just... I see the value of it and I see that, but then I also see, gosh, it's such a waste of time and such a time drain. But anyway...
Yes.
But those things are not the same as feet on the ground, in a bucket line, perhaps, putting like a
Yeah,
fire out the old days. And people used to stand in bucket lines and just pass water to get the fire out. That
absolutely.
shows a concerted effort for communities to help each other. That's what I think we would need. We'll probably will get to, but it will be at the hands of some sort of natural disaster, perhaps.
Yes, as it always does, and of course another strong theme of this universal year of 2018, which is a 2 vibration, master number vibration. Adding everything up to the 11, which is about stop standing so divided and come together in cooperation. There's a huge calling for that this year, uniting the divide wherever it exists in your life or wherever it exists in this world, because it does exist. Like again, there's just this disconnection that needs to get resolved and healed and ultimately dealt with.
Well, I think that the disconnection you're talking about, I think, is the sort of people hovering in this, push me, pull you mode, where you can't quite decide which way to go. We're all in that state because
Yes.
we are sort of. Maybe I speak for myself only, but I do feel as if many of us are sort of in a let's just see what happens, rather than really making plans to go forward. There's a few people, headstrong Aries, such as myself, who are going to go through anyways.
Yes, that's right.
Damn the torpedoes. But I may also pay the price for that. But then again, if you don't take a chance, you don't really find out. So you have to sort of balance that out. But I do think a lot of people are in that hovering mode, just content or happy to just wait and see what happens, because it changes so frequently we can't even keep up.
I know you can't today. It's mesmerizing, actually. But of course, even before, all of us becoming more and more shocked on a daily basis.
Well, one of the problems with that is that it becomes an addiction of sorts, and I have to say.
Yes. And how do we really filter that? Because we're so stunned by what goes on. And it is like it's utterly shocking, what keeps happening.
Each day is different.
And just like the pile gets higher and higher and higher, and it's like, well, how do you filter through all of that? And you're absolutely right. Like, it does put people in this hesitant energy. Well, okay, well, I don't really know, and I don't. I can't make a decision under this kind of, situation. So yeah, and then there's other people who, like you say, they go anyway.
Right, and
they don't let anything stop them.
That may be good. Those people are needed, I think, on some level, just to keep the show going, keep the great engine running. There has to be some of that out there. But it is a time where we see this sort of divide, and of course, over the course of the summer, we've been talking about this. I know you and I have. At least we probably had this conversation maybe 10 years ago, which is no exaggeration. But about the upcoming time. Back then, we were talking about the time when Pluto entered into Capricorn, and that this is going to be the Pluto return for the United States. And we really are in that space right now whereby I think that by 2024, 2028, we're going to see an entirely different country in some ways. We're not going to be
we will.
who we once were. And this was all something that we had seen with regard to, the Pluto. And, of course, the Pluto in 2020, Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto together.
Oh, yeah.
That's going to be a large,
interesting time of change.
A large responsible transformation. We don't quite know what that looks like, but I suspect it's
responsible transformation. That's a good way.
Well, that's how I boil that recipe down.
And that's really taking the grouping of those 3 planets,
right?
And it's going to create something. With the powers that be, it is definitely going to be doing that, and it is going to restructure the whole value system of this country. It's undeniable that it would not.
Right, and I do think that there's a certain natural pendulum swing to the course of history, whereby we reach one extreme, and then once we go so far to one extreme, we do tend to walk our way back. So there is something to be there, but as I said. As I was talking to somebody the other day about this, is that it's going to get worse before it gets better, which is not to instill panic in everyone. It's just to give you an idea of how to prepare yourself. What do you do? We don't know what's going to happen to real estate. We don't know what's going to happen to our infrastructure. We don't know what's going to happen to the finance world. If the stock market were to collapse, what would that do? Do we have the safety net involved today that we didn't have in 1929 as a result of 1929? Or have we learned our lessons? Is this becoming easier? These are all questions that we don't have an answer to.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting too, because and whether this will already be in motion before, that lunar eclipse happens on the 27th of July, but that's very significant for our chart as well, because that Mars retrograde, the eclipse, and the current transit of the South Node are all going to be aligned on that lunar eclipse, which is in the United States' second house. So there's a release that's coming. It's a big process of reflection, and that of course extends far beyond the natural waning phase, which is going to take us through until the solar eclipse that'll happen August 11th. And then of course that's going to be in the United States' big house of new transformation coming. So it's very precarious with what will happen, stock market wise, and leading into the fall, because the Venus retrograde always seems to have a little interesting things to do with, financial workings of any kind when she's retrograde. So that's going to be another interesting time frame in October. And then I just love how she turns around on the 16th of November and then passes the retrograde baton to Mercury.
I know, and they just say,
there we go.
You take over, it's your turn.
Yeah, you take over, Mercury. I'm done now. I got to go do my hair.
Exactly.
I haven't done my hair in 6 weeks.
Typical Venusian thing. But, the thing of it is that we want to understand this in its context. If the stock market is no reflection of the economy, we all know that. We know that obviously there's a lot of good numbers out with regard to job growth and stuff like that. We see all that stuff happening, so people are very optimistic about that. And things are going, but that's all based on, unusual circumstances that are not always tied to reality, and a lot of speculation is there. And so that can be a bit scary in itself. There's no question about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. Well, as I think the Chinese, they always say, may you live in interesting times. That we're definitely doing.
Yeah, there's no question about that. No one would argue that. And
no one could argue that.
And it's, it's just really, I think it's a startling reminder of how, not only how accurate astrology is and how accurate the cyclical nature of our lives are, because it is all based on that, but it also ties in. What I love about it is that it does tie in numerologically as well, which it gives you that sense of, okay, there is a natural order of logic here. And so let's speak a little bit about that with the United States. As you mentioned earlier, we're going to be we are in a 3-year. We will be entering into a 4-year. Is that correct? On July the 4th?
Yes. Yeah. On July 4th this year.
And so give us a little background.
And I'll correct my earlier. The Uranus will actually be in the 5th house for the nation when we cross over. So the where it first starts off is saying, hey, America, what are you creating? What are you doing? With that passion that you have. So there, in how we create as a country needs to be reinvented. And then, of course, it's going to be much later in the fall, in November, when Uranus will dip back into that 4th house.
That same place,
of the nurturing. And then that'll be, hanging out there till next spring when, after it moves forward again. Because, this little taste that we're going to get of Uranus and Taurus is not going to be for very long. It's only going to be from what's coming up next week until the earlier part of November. And then it'll go back and hang out in those last degrees of Aries through next year.
Well, I think it'll give us a good preview, I think, of what's to come.
Oh, yes.
And I think that's why it's worthy of noting. And I think you'll be able to get threads of what we think could happen in that time frame, what the future might look like in some ways. I do think it's going to be a financial reckoning of some sort. And
I agree.
I think that
because it's wavering on that tipping point, under the retrograde. So, whether we see, a lot more natural disasters as well working into that, because it just keeps teeter-totter. It's going to teeter-totter over the edge of Aries into Taurus, for the next year at this point.
And they really are very different energies, and I don't think. It's just a much different kind of vibe that happens. I mean, with Uranus and Aries, we saw a lot of the things that we'd expect to see, sort of these new initiations. We saw an explosion of the internet, so all that made sense. But we've also seen a lot of disrupt. We saw the Arab Spring unfold over the course of this time that Uranus has been there. So there's been a lot of rebellion and upset, which you'd expect with Uranus involved.
we could have called that.
Yeah.
Not exactly knowing how it was going to pan out, but we knew the types of activities that were bound to
Well,
occur.
we knew that there was going to be a period of upset that did happen.
Upset.
And that upset, of course, was put in motion by the United States invading Iraq in 2003 or whatever it was, which then, really was like taking a baseball bat to a beehive, and we just set the whole thing in motion. And now we've got this enormous, and now it's getting even more heated up. And this is where my concern is. As I said, when we look at the historical precedent and what we've seen in the past, this is what's disturbing, because if you go back to the 84 years, and this is where you get those cyclical natures, we see this kind of, marching up to this. And of course, we've got people in the White House now who are the hawks who want to go to war, and we're like, oh no, we don't want to go to war. Haven't we learned anything at this point in time? So it's really it's worth noting, and I think that historically, people looking at this will say, wow, what a time to have been. What a time to have lived through. And that's okay, but I think what we're trying to say here, I would say, is to keep your ear to the ground and cover yourself in ways that you think are very basic. I think it's not so far to go to say cover your bases, shore up your defenses in some ways.
Yes, and it's simplified as you can try to start making your life is not a bad idea either. Keeping things simpler is going, as complicated as everybody's lives are at this point, the simpler we approach them and kind of have that grace of understanding as we're doing things in the midst of things realigning and organizing themselves, so to speak. That's going to help everyone.
I think simplicity is the way to go. I mean, use this period of what relative affluence to shore up your bank accounts, shore up your supplies, shore up your houses, shore up your foundations, and get yourself together for what we could see to be a way of self-preparation for what we could see unfolding in the future. We're talking today with Sharita Star. Her website is sharitastar.com, SHRITA star.com, Sharita Star, one long word.com. She's a numerologist and an astrologer, and we're having a good conversation here. We're taking a quick break, and we'll be back in about 2.5 minutes. Hang in there, check out our website in the meantime, and we'll be right back to continue our discussion.
What is your destiny? Where are you going? What is your real purpose? Do you know? Do you want to know? Of course you do. It's your duty to yourself. We are all here for a reason, and we all have great potential. Discover all of this and more with a professional astrology reading. My name is Chris Flisher, and I can help you. Discover your strengths and work on your weaknesses, and live your life to its fullest capacity. Based on your birthday, birthplace, and birth time, an authentic astrology reading will allow you to live your life to the fullest and reveal your true purpose. Only real astrology can give you real information. It is your destiny, and it is your path. Write me at chris@chrisflisher.com and book a reading today, or call me at 978-393-1036. That's 978-393-1036. www.chrisflisher.com.
Astrology is the science of spirit, and it can serve as an invaluable aid in making the difficult choices in life and seeking truth in all the directions we choose. It holds the potential to allow each of us to evolve to our highest potential. It is the logic of the universe, the code of existence, and the pathway to true wisdom. It is our duty to draw from it the instructions for our lives and to live them to our fullest potential. As the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed.
Hi, your host, Chris Flisher here. I've been producer and host of this podcast and radio show for the past 10 years. My goal has always been to provide enlightening, progressive, and logical discussions about where we are as a species and how we move ourselves further down the road towards our greater potential. I believe astrology provides a great tool for observing our progress and awakening our consciousness to becoming a whole, better, and more complete individuals. I have sought to invite the best contemporary guests, thought leaders, and progressive minds to discuss topics that concern us all, regardless of your beliefs. Consider, making a contribution through PayPal to help keep the great wheel turning so that I can continue for the next 10 years along the same enlightened path. As always, I thank you for your support.
Welcome back to Turning of the Wheel. Our guest today is Sharita Star. She's an old friend of mine. We did a few radio shows back in the day on good old-fashioned world radio, whereby you sat behind a microphone and people could pick you up on their car. Now the world has changed dramatically, and now we do podcasts because no one wants to turn. People want to have their content when they want to have their content. They want to be content in charge, and so the idea of a podcast, even though you don't get the live spontaneity of a live radio show, you do get the knowledge gets out there and the conversations get there, and that's really what matters. But anyway, Sharita, when we look down the road into the elections of 2020 into 2024, we will have already had our Pluto return by then, and we wonder what the United States will look like and what does that mean when we say we're going through a transformation. We can see that happening now. We can see the EPA being ripped apart. We can see the tax cuts happening for the rich. We can see these are all basic, I think, foundational qualities of what I would call reconstruction. But it's also reconstruction on a world order. Now, we really can't do an horoscope for the world because we don't know what day the world was born. But when you look at that, so we have to sort of parse that information out by country. If you look at North Korea, what's happening to them? If we look at what's happening to Iran and in Israel, what happens there? So we have to look at these things from a countrywide basis because they all supposedly have birth dates or at least times when they were incorporated as an entity. So when we look at some of those other countries, and I'm not going to put you on the spot, you may not know this, but I'm sure that there's some sort of an alignment that pairs nicely with people like say Kim Jong-un and his country as to why we're at this moment. Now, some would say this is a very positive moment to be getting to the table, to have this guy coming and talking with us. We could say, well, that's great. We haven't had this conversation in a long time. No one else has gotten there. But what does that look like ultimately? Is it a step in the right direction or is it a false front?
Well, and I'm not an expert on all of the world affairs as much as my specialty with what I do is a lot more on the personal level for the individual. I obviously keep an eye on things, but I can't say I've ran the chart of any of those. I know there's a lot of astrologers who get into that, just not where I sit in always needing to know these things. But knowing the United States' chart, as I do, we always have to be very careful as a nation with whatever we do with foreign affairs due to the placement of Neptune in our 9th house.
Right. Because
we tend to, not every time, but we have to be cautious not to get caught up in delusion of what we may be very deceived by agreements and different things that we are doing as a country. And I think history has semi-proven that on some level. But in light of also what you're talking about, we discussed that this, we're going into this this year as a nation, which is going to solidify the foundation we started back in 2015. But as we look to what will be happening coming up on a year from now, next July, the nation goes into a 5-year. And that's when you're going to watch Mercury the whole year long, as far as the planet that's guiding the 5, because the 5 is guided by Mercury. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting as we look at the birth chart or the transit chart of the country. Mercury starts off stationed to go retrograde just a couple of days after July 4th in 2019 in our area of rebirth again. So there's going to be a very strong, intense cycle of what is happening. And we're going to get this from the retrograde this summer, but we're going to get it again next year. It's going to be the same. It's going to be in a little bit of a different area of the 8th house. It's going to be in the first half of it. And also the Mercury will retrograde back over the country's natal Mercury retrograde next summer in July. So that's going to be it's going to be interesting.
Well, it's
yet again.
There's no question about it. But,
because what the States is going to see in 2019 to 20 is a tremendous force of permanent changes that they will be irreversible. What will transpire 2019 into 2020 will be irreversible. And in the current 9-year span of time that the country is currently in, next year is when things really get even more interesting than they already are.
Well, when you say irreversible, that implies that some major structural changes to either systems or organizations or structures, such as the tax structure,
Yes.
I don't think anything major like Social Security is going to go away or anything like that, because some of the people are already heavily involved in that, and they can't just yank the rug out. But they could put in place.
I think that'll come eventually, but not so soon.
Right,
no.
Exactly. But those are the
a
sort
little
of things,
further down the road. The system won't sustain itself. I don't think for the long term.
Right.
But it's obviously there's something that needs to be corrected with that. That's a bottom line.
And
with
there's
that
a
as
certain
well.
thing that disturbs me, which is sort of the Congress's sort of avoidance of the great elephant in the room of the United States, which is our debt. And if that debt ever, it's so mammoth and so large, you could obviously say, well, it's never going to get paid off, it's going to get forgiven or whatever, and just let it be what it be. But at some point, that has to have an impact, which is what concerns me about this sort of, this free spending of, money that we don't really have, and that money has to come from somebody, and we are in a situation where we can't really, we can't alienate allies who might be lending us that money.
Well, and that'll be very interesting to see what's happening, on our birthday next year, because again, we're going to have, and of course this summer it's Mars, the Mars retrograde it's not in direct opposition to the Mercury retrograde that will be also going on once the end of July rolls along. But next summer, Mars will not be retrograde, but Mars will be involved with the Mercury retrograde.
Right.
It'll be Mars and Mercury are going to be right next to each other when the Mercury starts retrograding. So that's going to be interesting. And again, for this country, it is in our house of rebirth. It is in our area of what we do with other people's resources, which would encompass debt.
That's right.
So what are we going to do about that? And I think that time frame next summer is when you're really going to see a major revision, overhaul, total whatever can be corrected or whatever might happen to us. I don't know.
Well, and what that might mean too, don't forget, and this is some way of looking at it just through a different set of lenses, is that it may mean that there is in the midterm elections, the ball gets past the other side of the aisle, and whatever was done gets undone. So there could be something good in that. That's also
yes, and I know you know there's so many things that have gone into effect in history under a Mercury retrograde, and then what do you know? Like
Right.
even if it takes a number of years to fix it,
It gets fixed.
It gets corrected at some later date. It never stays exactly what gets instilled if it's signed into being under a Mercury retrograde.
right. It's always up in flux. Yeah.
There's always something. Yeah, there's it's riddled in error in some way, and it needs to be corrected moving forward, and sometimes that takes quite a bit of time, depending on who's involved.
These are big mechanisms, and they require they move very slowly, and that's just the way it is. You can't do much about that. When you talk about numerology, many people I'm sure are curious about the numerological impact of their own personal lives. Why don't you just just go through a quick lesson about what that's like? I know the rules, but it's good. It's good. It's good to know them, and it's good to have it, restated and reaffirmed, because I think people would want to say. I mean, the obvious question will be, well, the world may be going to hell in a handbag, but what about me personally? How do I determine my own personal fate in this? Because we're all on a different cycle, and the way you've always spoken, the way you've spoken to me, obviously you have your birth numbers, but then you also have your yearly numbers, and now yearly numbers play well with your planning for the coming year, and you do that based on your birthday of the year, and then you take the year of that time. My question to you is, when you have a year like 2018, which comes down to 11, what do we do with the 11? Do we keep it as 11, or do we turn that down into a 2?
Well, it is a 2, just to get the base, which is lunar. It's a lunar guided year, and that is why overall this year as a universal year is filled with emotions for the world overall, not just for the U.S. But when we add, I take the day, the month of birth. That's your constant. That never will change. It's always the stability that, your base, which also becomes your first pinnacle cycle. When you get into like the layers and depths of how to look at you have a numerological birth chart, just like you have an astrological one, and it just chunks off different periods of time in your life. So that day and month of birth is always your constant. So whatever year it is, you're just going to spread out the year. So whether it adds up to an 11 or it adds up to a 17 at some point, you just add that right on, and I get whatever compound number it is. And then I do reduce that back down to a single digit, because you do want to know that where are you in the 1 to 9. So you'll
right,
know that
exactly,
basis.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
But because I'm such a fan of Chaldean numerology, when we're looking at compound numbers with Chaldean numerology, there's a meaning behind all the numbers that are 10 and up. So if you're looking at a 10 versus looking at a 19, for example, let's say if it was a personal year, or you were born to the 10th or born to the 19th, you're still a 1, because the 10 and the 0 added together, reduced to 1, the 1 and the 9 become a 10, reduced back down to 1. So 10 and 19 are both 1 vibrations. Right. But the 10 means something very different than the 19 as far as what that Chaldean karmic mystery is. So when we're looking at a personal year, I want to know what's that Chaldean karmic mystery for your personal year, because it really taps in and is old and ancient as these mysteries are that the Chaldeans came up with. They so apply to this modern day world. It's uncanny to me. I'm never not. I'm always fascinated. Hence never bored. But I'm always fascinated by how, if we really get, and sometimes it's deep information to process, but it's important to assess into your spiritual journey, your ability to grow, because every year as we keep evolving on this planet, personally and collectively, but if we're not allowing ourselves the room to grow, then we're missing links in any given 9-year chapter in our life, because we just keep spinning in time, 1 to 9 every 9 years. And of course, when we are born, we get our life path number, and that's where we start. But then year to year, every birthday, we're going to start to see as we, hopefully mature, everything is going to start to cycle back 1 to 9, 1 to 9, 1 to 9, 1 to 9. And we do this our whole life. So we're always involved and engaged in the current 9-year chapter of our life. Right. And where are we in that? That's up to the math. And I stress this all the time, how important it is, no matter what is going on in the world. As you said, looking at yourself is how you're going to, find your control of what you can do and what you should be doing, and, work accordingly with what else is happening in the world. But you matter first,
So we know how to establish our natal numbers, our birth numbers, and that is good for setting the sort of laying down the pavement for the life to come. But when it comes to the individual years, I think people would be interested to know that real quickly. If we just did the 1 through 9 numbers, what people would do is you would take your birthday and your birth month. I mean, your birthday, just your whatever birthday year is. You take the month,
the calendar date of the month.
Right. You take the month and the day, and you add that. You add that to the year, and you reduce it all down to one number, and that will give you the number for the year. So if you could just go through the 1 through 9, just a quick, 3 words per number, what they entail, people could get an idea of what the theme that they're in.
Well, we start at 1, depending on where you are. Right. But a 9-year cycle obviously starts at 1. Again, we were talking about this with the U.S. So the last time the U.S. was in a 1 year was back 15 to 16. And then, so 1 is always about initiation. You're going to start something new. It's going to be a new beginning. It's a time to plant seeds. I always say in a 1 personal year, if it's new, it's for you. Right. Meaning you need to, in those 12 months of that year's cycle, check things out, explore, be willing, be open. Because, and you don't have to say yes to everything, but if you don't give yourself the opportunity, you may pass up something in a seed that you're really meant to be planting.
Right.
So your 2-year, which will follow, is about kind of watering the seeds,
Okay.
which, of course,
Nurturing.
a 2-year is lunar guided, so it's going to be emotional. A lot of times in a 2 personal year, you'll have a home, family life situation, something that crops up, or something with a very close interpersonal relationship. If let's for
And that could be a birth or a death.
It could be a birth or a death.
That's important.
Sometimes it's for like a woman, especially, or even a male. It's time when children come into the life. Or if you're in a rocky relationship, the 2 year is going to get rid of it. It's going to bring the emotions out, and you're going to have to deal with it. Mm-hmm. Or the passing of a parent sometimes happens in a 2 personal year, because it's a paternal energy
or
as well.
It just sort of it gives an imprint to the idea of change in that part of your life. That's sort of,
yes, and it's where you're really meant to be in a nurturing space in your life. However you need to do that. It's going to be a different story for everyone. And in a year like that, also what I do with all the 9 years, the planet that guides the year, I also watch the transits of that planet in your natal astrological chart.
And so the 2 years always driven by the moon.
Driven by the moon, that's why it's a topsy-turvy year sometimes, because the moon moves the fastest.
Right.
So each new and full moon every month are extra significant that year. Mm-hmm. The eclipses are very significant to show you where release is happening, where significant beginnings are as well.
And what's the plan for the first, number 1?
For the 1 is the sun, of course, because we're creating something, and we're putting light onto something again.
Exactly.
So yes, and so on to the 3, it's Jupiter guided. So where's Jupiter that year? And of course, the 3 years about growth, new learning, and starting to see the seeds that you just planted a couple years ago start to kind of emerge out of the ground a little bit. So you start to see the shoots come up, and a lot of foreign travel sometimes is very favored in a 3-year, or dealing with foreign affairs on some level. But it's also about you really being again, willing to be a student. Willing to learn something.
That's right. Open yourself up.
And gain new knowledge of some level in your life. And depending on where Jupiter is transiting your chart, that's going to be the area of your life where you're going to see that effect really kind of hit home the most.
That's great.
In a 4-year, of course, that's Uranus. And it's in the beginning of any 9-year span, you're looking at the 1, 2, 3, 4 years are all about a new foundation that you're building. So each year sort of represents a wall, so to speak. And so the 4-year it's also like I relate it to like the senior stretch in high school. It's like you almost go back to school every 9 years. And then your 1 year is your freshman year.
Well, that's good. That shows that
so
we have the capacity to keep learning. But the 4-year is summarized by what?
By, again, it's Uranus, you've got a little bit of the unexpected that always shows up in a 4-year. You're getting obstacles out of your way. And in the analogy of going back to the seed planting, what you started the 3 years prior, at that point, now the root system of what you began is going to get solid. So that's where the overcoming obstacles comes into play. Because if you look at roots under the ground, if a root comes up against a rock, it doesn't stop growing. It just finds a way to get around the rock. So exactly. It's just going to go, okay, I have to go this way. I wanted to go this way, but now I've got to go that way. And I just go around it, so that your system becomes very solid of what you began, again, over the 3 years prior, so that when you move into your 5-year, which is Mercury guided, and that's when the moving and the grooving happens. It's blossoming. It's a major year of major movement, because you're also going to watch Mercury transiting throughout your chart, and as well as looking at all the retrogrades. But most of the time we leverage our life very much in a 5-year. Permanent irreversible change will go down. Right. Hopefully not under the Mercury retrograde, least important decisions. You got to watch those Mercury retrogrades in a 5-year to not be making really important stuff happen. Yeah. So the 5-year is like, wow, it like, and if you've, been developing a concept and doing things, the 5 really allows it to be seen by people. Your communications are going to get broader about what you've been working on. And it's like you're exposed, like you can't, like the growth is there. It totally happens. And it kind of also is a clearing year too. It allows things to move away that you don't need anymore. And most of the time, whatever that may be, you won't go back to what it once was. Right. So it is a permanent, like I said, like it's almost like irreversible changes. And then your 6th year to follow is kind of like most of the time should be very calming because it's Venus guided and it's more pleasure oriented, and it kind of takes, like you just went through this like wild year of change.
Yeah, it's a chance to recover, yeah.
So it's your recuperating year, and to find your balance back and align some understanding. Your compassion may be very called upon in a 6th year, because 6 is also the number of compassion. But it's a time where things really want to even out, balance back out, and feel like, okay, there is peace after all this change. That perspective, it gives you that ability to kind of reflect back in understanding a little bit of, oh, wow, this did happen for a reason. I wasn't crazy, or, because a lot of people never understand the change when they're in the midst of it.
It's
right?
sort of a chance to take stock, I think, of what happened, what you've been through. Exactly. Sort of like doing like a post-mortem, so to speak, or whatever, for lack of a better word.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's also a year, a 6 year is good for if you've got like legalities pending in your life and things like that need to be settled. It's a good year to do it. That'll work out in your favor.
That's good.
So it's a good year to make sure that you're taking care of things that are, if there's anything lingering in the background. And then the 7 year is about you. It goes back to you. And
self-identity.
I've trolleyed along here for 6 years. Now it's time for my self-work. So a lot of times in a 7 year, people withdraw from the world a little bit, and not to say you run and hide somewhere, but you tend to do more activities.
You're not as publicly out there. You're just more
exactly, sort of, especially if you're a writer or you're that kind of person. It's a great year to like take the time off to write the book or to do the research and work on yourself. Or if there's things in your life that have built up and, hey, I've developed this habit, I don't like it. It's a great time to work on your own healing, your own self-reflection, sharpen the inner sword, so to speak.
And what's the planet for that? That's the planet of...
That would be Neptune.
Neptune, that's what I thought.
And that's Neptune, of course, because, Neptune wants us to... take our time and listen and reflect and listen. The reason why I think anybody misses the boat with any kind of Neptune transit or effect in their charts is because they don't take the time to be silent and listen. And those two words are not spelled the same. Well, they don't use the same letters for no reason.
Well, I think it's fascinating. I love that.
That's a lexigram. That's one of those lexicograms that I do. But silent and listen are the same exact letters. So you cannot listen if you're not silent. So a 7 personal year, really, if you honor that, you will get the rewards from it tenfold, which will then display themselves in the year to follow, in your 8 year, which is your Saturn guided year, which is about the harvest.
Yeah.
And it's taking everything you planted the 7 years prior, and it really sees the real fruit, the real, like the vegetables, whatever it is you planted, the harvest should be there. It's going to take a lot of work because, Saturn is not about sitting on your laurels, but it also will ask for your patience because nothing comes with, nothing. Saturn doesn't reward quickness, I don't think.
No,
he's not that kind of guy.
It's very sort of, ritualized, dogmatic, slow-moving. But the rewards do come. I would say that ultimately that Saturn is not the bad guy everybody thinks he is.
No, he's not a bad guy, but you got to know how to navigate him.
Right.
And work. Hence the word work. You got to know how to work with Saturn. And if you're not really doing it with integrity and responsibility to whatever it is that needs to be done, that's when the Saturn wants to throw, okay, well, you're going to learn from this experience because you're not listening again. Right.
And so you learn, you keep sticking your finger in the fan, you're going to find out the hard way.
You're going to find out that hurts.
Yeah, exactly.
So, in an 8 year as well, it's a great year for work achievements. Also, if you're a single person, it's really tends to connect you with a very significant person in your life
That's always
that
helpful.
that you need to be with. Or even if you're working in business, you tend to make connections that year that are very significant to your growth or your recognition and reward on that capacity. And again, you also want to know, where is Saturn in transiting in the chart, which is only going to be in a certain area for that year. That's the area of your life where you are most apt to receive these rewards by doing the work that you're supposed to. And then you move into the 9 year, which does ride that harvest a little bit, depending on how fruitful it and again, it's a result of your effort. So if you didn't do much in the 7 years, the 8 year of harvest might be a little bleak. So you have to kind of think about that.
It might not be the crop that you expected, right?
It may not be the crop that you expect. So depending on how that goes, that does ride a lot into the 9 year, because a 9 is also about a little fame and celebrity. So it also kind of can take what you earned in reward the previous harvest year and kind of amplify it a little further. But it also is about creating endings and creating finalizations. So a 9 year is also like a 5 year. It clears out things as well, because what you're doing is getting ready for what you're meant to take into the next 9 year chapter, because then after the 9 years concluded, you'll start again in another 1 year. So a 9 going back into a 1 year is very pivotal for most people's lives, because you're going to have to let go of some stuff in order for the new to be able to, you're going to have that fresh ground to plant new stuff again the following year.
So that lays the groundwork, and that's the Mars driven.
And that would be a Mars guided year. Yes. So you're going to want to know where Mars is in the chart and what's going on. So for anyone right now who happens to be in a 9 year, or who will stay in a 9 year for this summer, this Mars retrograde is very interesting. That it's going to fall into your forecast of, what is it that I'm going to be sincerely reflecting on.
Right. So it's a year of reflection, but you also say it's a year of celebrity. So that means that you sort of have reached a pinnacle of some sort, and you're looking back.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, the 9 is the end. We of course we have the 0, and we don't have a 0 year, obviously.
Right.
And I love astrology because we do use the 0 as far as how the charts works. We go from 0 to 29, not 1 to 30 degrees of every sign occupying space. So that it's almost like, you could think like the 0 is kind of in between the 9 and the 1, obviously in some capacity, just kind of more invisibly. But we have 9 single digits. Everything in numbers, compound numbers, everything, when you add those two numbers together, or 3, 4, whatever the numbers are, everything is going to always reduce to a number that is 1 to 9. So that's the cycles that we see in our personal lives in the same way, because everything always reduces back to 1 to 9.
Yeah.
So
what people do, just as a quick refresher, what you'll do is you will take your birthday and month, and then combine that with the year 2018 for this year, which would be 11. 11 reduces down to 2, and you add the other two numbers. So say, for example, your birthday is April 1st. A 4 and a 1 is 5. 5 and a 2 brings you down to a 7. That's the formula that you would apply. And then what you do is you apply that theme to all the areas that Sharita just mentioned, and you should get an idea of where you are in your life right now and how you're getting on, and you'll find that this ties in incredibly accurately with astrology. So it really does.
Oh yes, it always does. And it's interesting, even for the example that you used, even just looking, and of course you'd have to know the rising sign on charts too, but even if you're looking at it from the sun sign solar perspective only, in Aries, in a 7 personal year, the Neptune is currently in Pisces, so it's in your inner world. It's already there. It's like an extra added bonus of, this is a good year to kind of work on me and make sure that I'm, working on myself from like the inside out, and a great year to record dreams and
anything has to do with the sort of the
subconscious, with your subconscious, deep psychology. There's a lot of healing that will happen in a 7 year as well, if you're doing the listening and a lot of times, for a broad example, if people have like a substance issue, and they've kind of trolleyed along and ignored it for a period of time, a 7-year will catapult them into healing somehow. Either they will hit rock bottom in a 7-year and they've got to figure it out. And if that is a very strong theme for an example like that. So you see that. I mean, I've seen that a lot.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's fascinating. That gives us a good summary for people to sort of take off and go with and get an idea of where you are in your particular years and what you can work on. The idea is we give just simple descriptions which allow you to amplify them into greater themes for your own personal life, and it works quite well. Unfortunately, we have run out of time here. It looks like our time has come to an end, but it's always been great. It's always great to see the interplay between astrology and numerology. I'm always fascinated by the two and how closely they are aligned and how well they dovetail with each other into creating a sense of who you are as an individual. I just find it to be fascinating. So anyway.
It's so complementary, and they're both guided by the same planets, as I was taught. So it's just about planets to me. It's just, is it a number or a sign that's telling me that?
Yeah, no, I think it's very, very cool. Anyway, we've been talking today with Sharita Star. Her website is sharitastar.com, SHARITA star.com, one long word, sharitastar.com. And you can see her. She's on Facebook as well, and Twitter, and all those other places too. Maybe not as much as she used to be, but she's there. And so I encourage you to reach out to her and see where your numbers are and how they play out in your life coming forward. So thanks so much, Sharita, for coming back on today. It's been great catching up with you again.
Thanks so much for having me back, and it's been a pleasure to be here and to help your listeners.
Very good. There we go. Thanks so much. Take care.
You've been listening to Turning of the Wheel with your host, Chris Flisher. To schedule a reading with me or to order artwork, you may visit my website at www.turningofthewheel.com. That's www.turningofthewheel.com. Or you can call me at 978-393-1036. Thank you. And as always, be open to possibilities.